Man, I'm so excited today as we, in this Love First emphasis, highlight this area of mental health. You know, there's been so much myth surrounding mental health and quite honestly, so much shame associated with it that for too long, I think the church has just done nothing. And so today we're changing that. We're raising awareness and we're going to remove the veil of shame and we're going to watch our God who can't be stopped, who can do anything. We're going to see him bring healing in our midst today. Today, we want to introduce to you Dr. Henry Cloud. He's an acclaimed leadership expert, clinical psychologist, and a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author who's written over 40 books, selling over 20 million copies worldwide. Books on a variety of topics like setting healthy boundaries, navigating relationships, and healing from past hurts. He's spoken around the world for audiences of CEOs, leadership teams, and executives to improve performance, leadership skills, and culture. With over 25 years of helping people as the clinical director of his own healthcare company, Dr. Cloud is able to draw on his extensive experience of clinical psychology and leadership development to impart practical and effective advice. What I love about Dr. Cloud is he's born in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I've asked him to jump straight into this content today of helping us with mental health. So would you open your heart, put your hands together, and welcome Dr. Henry Cloud.
Now, we're talking about mental health. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about something way out in the fringes, locked up in a rubber room. What we're talking about is how do we feel and how do other people feel? How are we relating and how are we performing? And our mental functioning basically affects all of those things. Now, I can give you statistics, and I can try to normalize this with a bunch of, descriptions and diagnoses and all of that. But I thought I would start out by giving you a real picture and telling you about somebody that had, let's call it like we're calling it, mental health issues in real life. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'll tell you who the person is. Me. All right? This is how... And I'm sharing I've written about this in books and in other places, but I want to show you kind of how we're not talking about real extremes here. Okay, so I grew up in Vicksburg, and I was, pretty, quote, normal kid, and had a lot of friends, involved in a lot of stuff, having fun and sports and hunting and fishing, and that's the best thing about living in Mississippi, right? Oh my gosh. The duck hunting in the Delta above Vicksburg, the fishing at Eagle Lake and the reservoir. Oh my gosh, don't get me started. Deer hunting. I miss you guys. Anyway, I had a pretty normal life and, I was a good student and all that. But my particular passion was competitive golf. I grew up there playing competitive golf all around the South and throughout the state. Got recruited to play golf in college at SMU. But the point is I go off to college and I'm kind of a normal kid, right? And have great dreams and aspirations, go through my freshman year and all. But something happens. I had a hand injury that started to affect my play. I'd take the club back and I have shooting pains down my arm and I just couldn't play sometimes. And I played poorly sometimes. Other times I would play well, and it was up and down. I went to a million doctors, and they couldn't fix it. And end of my sophomore year, I had to quit my, at that time, lifelong dream of pursuing some kind of a career in golf. And my life was over at the ripe old age of 19. And what I want you to register this is, I had a huge loss. Okay, there's a lot of kinds of losses, but that's an important word. Also, right about the same time, I had a very serious girlfriend and we broke up. So I had two major losses right then that really kind of cracked at also my identity of who I was and what I was pursuing and what life was about, pursuing your goals, etc. And I hit the pavement. Now, if I had known what I know now as a psychologist, I would have probably put me in a hospital. Right, but I got really depressed, guys. And I got so depressed and so, didn't know how I was going to get out of this. And I had no motivation. And I was trying to crawl out of the black hole. That summer, I decided, if you call it a decision, I don't think I really could have pulled it off. But I had to take a semester off of school. the fall of my junior year. And fortunately, in the course of all that, depression and unable to really function much, I walked into a little chapel there on the SMU campus, and I looked at an empty, dark, the lights weren't on. It was on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I looked at the ceiling and I said, God, I don't know if you're there, but I need help. And nothing happened. And that was the loneliest moment of my life. I reached out to God. I was kind of a believer of some sort, but this is the first time I really needed him. And I was waiting to get zapped like they do on TV, right? But nothing happened, no zapping. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, what if he's not there? And I said, but God, please help me. And nothing happened. And I said, well, kind of like, okay, call me. Well, I went back to my dorm and the phone rang. And it was a fraternity brother of mine. He said, I don't know why I'm thinking of you right now. You'd be the last person I would think of, probably because I was such a party animal. He said, but we're starting a Bible study at the fraternity house, and I'd like to invite you. And I said, I'll be there. Well, long story short, I got in this Bible study in this group, and a pastor and his wife, who was leading the group, they kind of adopted me and discipled me and took me under their wing in this spiritual community of this small group. That began a process of healing for me, in addition, to counseling and other stuff. But here's the point with all that. About, a year later, maybe, it's kind of climbing out of it, I got healed. And from where I was, as a psychologist today, I can tell you, I certainly had a major depression. I probably had an anxiety disorder, and I certainly had a wrecked life. And certainly my relational life was becoming, frayed, because I would isolate and I'd go on, long drives by myself, trying to work this out of my head and all of this. I was mentally ill, if you want to call it that. But see, what are we talking about? We're talking about a college kid in a fraternity, sitting in class with other kids, having friends, playing golf. See, mental illness is not something for the extremes. What you've got to realize is this is something right there in your church, in your neighborhoods. There's people just like me back then, and they're going through a period of time where they're suffering in one of these areas. So that's what mental illness is. It's a disturbance where we break down, our functioning breaks down clinically. Anxiety, mood disorders, depression, thought disorders, thinking well, all this kind of stuff, energy levels, concentration, sleep, appetite, sex drive, goal orientation, drive, confusion, all of that stuff. And somebody at work like this. I'm sure you do. They're going through a hard time. Okay? So let's normalize this. And yes, it is true that it can get extreme. And sometimes people have to go into a hospital or a treatment center, or they have to go into rehab or whatever. But I just want to take the hocus pocus out of it, because what we're talking about is humans. So you probably know somebody right now. You have to know somebody that's kind of going through a depression or going through an anxiety disorder. I've got a woman in our small couples group who about 4 months ago had a total high-functioning, total breakdown into panic attacks and anxiety, couldn't leave the house, right? Well, got her into some treatment, started doing the right things, got her on the right medicines, and now we're 4 or 5 months later, and she's back functioning, and she's doing great. So this is a high-functioning woman. I work with CEOs and high performers and athletes. Nobody's immune, okay? So let's normalize this. Now, here's the other thing about you as a church in your loving first, strategy here is because we're not talking about extremes and we're talking about your communities and your neighborhoods and your families all around you. What a great, great, great opportunity to share the love and the help of Jesus. When I was going through mine and I reached out, Jesus showed up. But how did he show up? I was waiting to get zapped. No, I said, call me. The phone rang, and it was a fraternity brother of mine inviting me to a Bible study, a small group. Okay, and then I got involved in a church, in a spiritual community, and I saw a counselor. So I always thought that was like plan B. Plan A was when God does the miraculous healing. But, plan B, if that doesn't work, God uses people too. I remember my Bible study leader told me that after a month. I said, I'm praying to God, but I'm still depressed. And he said, well, God uses people too. Sometimes he doesn't just heal us, he uses people too. And I go, that's such a cheesy, lame bailout. God uses people too. And I thought, okay, well, that's where I am. So God used people to heal me. And I thought that was sort of like the cheap seats, right? Instead of, I want to be down on the good seats where God zaps me. And I thought that was kind of plan B. Well, it worked. I got healed. But then one day, a year later, I was reading my Bible, and in Ephesians 4, it says that when we grow up into Him, he says the whole body, meaning the people, the body of Christ, knitted together with every supporting ligament. So we're in these relationships, and God knits us together as a community, as a family. And then it says the whole body, are you ready for this? Heals itself as each part of the body does its work. And I realized, God, you did heal me directly. Because that's not plan B, it's plan A. That's what your word says. That as we are working together and everybody brings something to the party, a little support, a little encouragement, a little insight, a little correction, a little modeling, being a bridge to help get somebody to a doctor, supporting them in between appointments. There's a million ways, but as each part does their work, then we can be healed. And that's what I learned. And so that's why I wanted to start with a little bit about my story, to let you know, A, we're not talking about other than just people that are out there in your life, but B, we're not talking about that it's the end of the story either. Okay, now this is the verse I'm going to come back to at the end, but what happened to me? Well, I went through this and I learned about all this stuff and I got healed, and then God called me into this work for a lifetime. And for, last, 3 or 4 decades, 3 decades plus, I've been helping people in this space of getting mentally, emotionally healthy and getting their performance levels up and all that. And the verse is this, 2 Corinthians 1, it says, we comfort others with the comfort by which we have been comforted by God. See, the Christian faith is not a faith of sacrificing out of an empty cup. A lot of times we think, we come to faith and then we got to die to self and sacrifice and all those good things. But we're kind of doing it out of empty cups. Like, I got no water in my cup and I got to give you water. And so people get depleted. No, the Bible is an overflow model. It says we love because He first loved us. And so as God fills us with His love through Himself and through His body, through His people, and our lives begin to get, full, then what do? We want to share that with others. And we want to give to others. So the reason I start with my story is not only is this kind of just happening all around us, like I was just another kid in the dorm, right? But we can be healed. And once we're healed, or if we're not suffering, we can give to others with what God has given to us. And so that's why I'm just trying to pass it on to you so you can pass it on to others as well. So, big takeaways from my story. It's pretty normal. It happens. But it also happens sometimes because there's a triggering event. I had massive losses. Many people that may begin to experience some sort of breakdown clinically or in their performance, in their relationships, because they have a massive loss. There's death all around us. People that have lost people this year, right? And whenever somebody goes through a death, that can be a trigger. Whenever anyone that goes through a job loss, that could be a trigger. Whenever anyone goes through a loss of some significant relationship, an extended family or friendship or circles, or even moves. You know, if somebody moves, that is, I think a move is like right behind death or divorce for prediction of an illness within the following year, because when you move, there's so much loss involved. Financial reversal, physical reversals, the loss of health. See, all of those can be triggering events. So let's get into now, for just to take the mystery out of this, what causes us to have problems in our mental capacities and functioning? Well, basically kind of four things. It's going to start with your genes. I've got a heart surgeon buddy from college. I said, Fred, what do I need to be doing for my heart? And the first thing he said, pick your parents well, because there's a genetic component to this. Okay, well, same thing in mental health. Some people have a genetic predisposition to depression, for example, or other kinds of things we carry, and it's not 100%, but it plays a factor. Okay, especially in some of the more severe problems like bipolar illness and some kinds of depression and schizophrenia and things like that. There's a high biological component like this which we inherit in our genes. All right, so that's just one factor. The next factor is the environment we grow up in, okay, which means environment in a big way. The next factor is the experiences that we have. So you take somebody that's floating along in life, you know, and they're a kid and this, that, and the other, and they have, let's say they're abused at age 4, okay? Or they lose both of their parents at age 6. Or there's a horrible trauma or split up in the family at age whatever. These experiences, sort of like, you know, it's sort of like a tornado. You know, when a tornado comes through Mississippi there, you know, it's going to hit some houses and hit some trees and neighborhoods. It's going to cause some damage, and that house is not going to work like it's supposed to work until the damage gets fixed. Well, life experiences, traumatic events do this to people. That's why we have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from veterans that have, you know, seen people blown up in front of them and the ravages of war and all that. It basically, those experiences stick in your brains. They physiologically get glued to the memory centers where they can't get processed until they're therapeutically processes, and they keep coming back in flashbacks. Okay? Just because a bad experience happened to somebody. So a lot of people have mental health issues, not because anything they're doing wrong, but because of the crap that's happened to them. The equipment can't handle that. It gets really, really wrecked. And then they grow up, and at some point they're going to really start to exhibit symptoms until that's healed. All sorts of experiences that affect us. So we got genes, we got experiences. The next one is that there are, and this is one of the most important ones as well, is the developmental factors that happen as you are getting constructed as a human being. Okay, when God builds a person, it's like a house, there's a blueprint. And you gotta, I'll go into this more in a minute, but you gotta lay a slab, and there's gotta be a frame, right? And then you gotta fill the house with certain kinds of wiring and this and the other. Well, when we grow up, the way God designed it, we come into our families, right? Or whatever environment we grew up in. And basically, there's not a lot of stuff on the computer there. And through the relationships, we begin to internalize wiring and the software. So if our families were practicing, as Deuteronomy 6 says, when Moses said, go do all this stuff I've given you. God tells us he's given us these ways to practice in our families with our kids and walk in these ways and teach these ways and experience these ways of love and compassion and support and forgiveness and letting each other know when we're making mistakes, and then owning that and repenting from it and taking your talents and using them in a supportive, loving environment. If you'll walk in these ways, he said that you will always prosper. In Deuteronomy 6, it says, this will be your righteousness, and God has given us these ways. love, acceptance, forgiveness, learning, supporting talents, helping each other grow, community, all of these ways, so that we might always do well, is what it says. But in some families, God's ways are not practiced. There's not emotional connection. There's abandonment and isolation. There's not support of your freedom. There's control and manipulation. There's not forgiveness for mistakes. There's perfectionistic critical demands. There's not support. So when somebody's growing up in some patterns like that, those become internalized in their heads and they're having to cope with all that. And then they go pick people like that or pick people, in response to that somehow. But we don't have the wiring inside to be able to prosper, as Moses put it in Deuteronomy 6. That word prosper doesn't just mean financially. It's a holistic, thriving word. It's just like shalom, kind of like everything's going well. The abundant life, as Jesus said. So sometimes we have mental illness that has to do a lot with our development. Okay? I learned that in my life. I had, there were some patterns I had learned from generations in our family that I had to change. And then the fourth one is, once we kind of learn the software, then what do? We tend to have practices in our lives that are depressing, or that create more anxiety, or that can fuel addictions, or that can fuel a lack of performance. So it's kind of like after the car gets built, then I go out and my frame's bent, but I continue to drive down the road in a certain way, and I'm going through my relational life, ordering my behavior in certain ways and ordering my practices in certain ways, and those can contribute to all of my diagnosable conditions. So when we're talking about treating mental illness and helping with mental illness or lack of mental health, well, we got to help in all four. If there's a genetic component and sometimes / biological, okay, there are a lot of times in a lot of different instances, particularly in the mood disorders, some kinds of depression, for example, or bipolar illness, particularly in the thought disorders and a lot of in the anxiety disorders, that there's a biological component. Just like if your body wasn't producing enough insulin, right? That would even affect your mental health. Talk to a diabetic or a hypoglycemic, your blood sugar levels drop, your concentration goes away. Sometimes they get depressed. Thyroids can depress you, okay? All sorts of stuff. But so can your neurotransmitters. Your brain is an organ, just like the other organs in your body. And it runs on these chemicals called neurotransmitters. Well, sometimes genetically or experientially, these neurotransmitters can get depleted and we literally don't have the right chemistry, just like glucose levels in our brains, to be able to fuel us. And we get depressed, we can get anxious, we have sleep disturbance, concentration problems, mood problems, energy level problems, libido problems, appetite disturbance, all of that falls into clinical and anxiety disorders can have a biological component and needs some kind of medical attention. Now, not all drugs are the same. Some are addictive and some are not good, but some are very, very, very necessary for treating these things, like, antidepressants, for example. It's not a happy pill. What an antidepressant does is it restores the brain chemistry to normal functioning. Okay, so sometimes people need to see a good psychiatrist or doctor and get the medicine. Secondly, the experiences, we treat those. So if you've had trauma, there's ways of processing that. You get with a therapist in a group or whatever, and you process the pain and the hurt, and you get it all out of there, and you change the thinking patterns that put in your head and all the victim paralysis and all of that, and people get better. Thirdly, your developmental issues. Okay? I'm going to list those here in a second, but if we developmentally, if we didn't learn how to make secure emotional attachments, then therapy and treatment, it teaches us how to connect with people and how to stay connected and overcome abandonment fears and rejection fears that disrupt the connectedness that we need. And so we can treat all of this through addressing these developmental issues. I wrote a book on this called Changes That Heal, the basic developmental issues in life within God's image, the way he made us, and how they get broken. And when they're broken, they produce symptoms, but we can fix them, and spiritual growth goes a long way in fixing them. And then lastly, our practices. Like we learn new behaviors, okay? We learn new ways of even communicating. See, a lot of times, we learn these patterns, and it gets in our communication styles, and then we can't have a good relationship, and our relationship breaks up. Well, then what happens when your relationship breaks up? Because communication patterns fail, and we can't have a long-term relationship, or we're controlling, or these practices. Well, relationship breaks up, and then we get depressed. Okay, it all goes together. See, this is why the Bible, and I'm going to talk more about this in a second, it calls us to this new life of practicing God's ways. And I don't know anything better we can do for our mental health than fly the plane like the engineer designed the plane to fly. And see, that's the beautiful thing about the scriptures. As a psychologist, I can tell you, and I'm deep in the science of all this, okay? I base everything on research, empirical studies, all of the science. And here's the amazing thing. You read the science, and what it tells us to do is exactly what God says do in his word. And everything he says do in his word, the science validates it. So spiritual growth and bringing people, you want to help and love first in mental illness, do what my friends did. Invite people to therapy. They got me a good counselor, okay? But they also invited me into their group. They invited me into the community where so much of what I was struggling with was healed. I just read this. 70% of people right now, especially in COVID, that are struggling with depression and other things, they put one of the highest factors is they're emotionally isolated. Well, your church is in the community where people are mostly isolated. Let's get connected. I want to give you 4 things about the construction when God builds a person. How, if we were just growing in these areas, if you were a psychologist and you were treating patients, these are the primary, by and large, 4 areas that all therapeutic interventions are going to live in one of these 4 buckets. And there's something we can do with each other all the time as well. Okay? Number 1, God builds a house. What does he do? A person, what does he do? He pours a foundation. The foundation is your connectedness. Okay? A baby comes into the world, and what do? You can't play chess with them or you can't play golf with them. You connect with them. And babies that are born in institutions and they're fed and watered, their physical needs are taken care of, but they're not connected with and loved, okay? And they start to grow up, or their bodies grow up, but their brain sizes are smaller from an absence of love. The wiring that's supposed to be there is start to have behavior problems at age 12. You take a brain scan, their brain, there's black holes where wiring and circuitry did not form because the human connection wasn't there. Okay? So human connection, not emotional isolation, but human connection, secure attachments, relationships that love us, that we can be vulnerable with. As Paul says in the New Testament, to have our hearts knitted together. Harvard just finished a 75-year study on successful and thriving lives, health, and every other form. The number one factor, 75-year longitudinal study, the number one factor that leads to a healthy life is the quality of your relationships. See, that's why God says that's the foundation of everything. Relationship with him, relationship with each other, this feeling of connectedness. All right, that's number 1. What happens if we're not connected? We get depressed. What happens if we're not connected? We have more anxiety. What happens if we're not connected and we're alone? We become fearful and paranoid, suspicious. A lot of other things. You might get addicted to fill up that emptiness. That's number 1. Number 2, once you're connected, well, you got to have freedom in your relationships. But see, if somebody, this is what we call boundaries. What does a 2-year-old do? They're connected, but then they learn to say no, and they learn to hear no. And they're learning self-control, not other control. So when my girls were little and they'd throw a tantrum as a toddler, I'd say, girls, I don't respond to screaming, but you get to go in timeout as long as you're screaming, and you get to sit over there, and when you can be quiet for 1 minute and then use your words and I'll talk to you, then you can get out of timeout. But what are we doing? We're setting limits, and they learn self-control. A lot of people have never learned good boundaries, and they grew up in homes where they were controlled, and so they don't even feel the ability to say no to manipulation, say no to other people controlling them, say no to people's guilt manipulations, and they keep enabling, or they're attracted to an addict and they can't set limits and say to the addict, you're going to get sober or get off heroin, or I'm not going to live with you, or whatever. They can't have good boundaries and keep people from hurting and manipulating them, and they feel controlled. Well, that is a recipe for depression and anxiety. If somebody doesn't have a feeling that I'm free to make my own choices and everybody else is controlling me, I will have some degree, and probably an extreme clinical proportion, of anxiety and depression. Number 3, we were supposed to live in a perfect world. We live in an imperfect world. So how do we manage that gap? See, if we have to be perfect, and all of this stuff in the gap, my failures, my losses, my mistakes, how do I handle those? Can I receive forgiveness for those? Do I feel okay when my failure? If I miss a shot on the golf course or throw an interception as a quarterback, do I all of a sudden, I'm such a loser, I'm such an idiot, to where I can't even perform because I go into an all bad position? Or if somebody else fails me, can I not deal with their imperfections? Okay, can I not deal with somebody else's even sin against me? Can I forgive them? See, our ability to be able to process the negative stuff in life, and some of this negative stuff is trauma. Can we grieve? Can we open up about our wounds and get all this pain out? See, this third thing of I'm designed to live in a perfect world, but I live in a fallen world, and how I process all of that pain through grief and forgiveness and acceptance, that's going to determine how resilient I am in the world of mental health. And then the fourth one is we were born to be little people in a big person's world, and there's one up and one down to adults, right? Well, then in Galatians 4, Paul says, we're born under guardians and managers until the date set forth by the Father. And then we grow up, and you gradually grow up, and now you're an adult and you're an equal to other adults. Well, some people never grow up, and they feel inferior, and they look up to other people, and they're always feeling judged and people-pleasing, trying to please other peers and adults as if they're parent figures. Okay, so we got to, psychologically, if we're feeling inferior all the time, we're going to be subject to being controlled. We're going to have performance anxieties. We're going to be afraid to take risks. We're going to be afraid of failure. What's this going to end up in? Depression, anxiety, addictions, all this stuff. So what are we talking about when we're talking about mental health? We're talking about really being able to function within the image of God. See, God created us in his image. And what does he do? He has connections. He has good boundaries and can set limits. He's free. He can forgive and grieve and process painful things. And he's an authority, He's got talents and abilities. And as an adult, he goes and puts those to good use. Well, see, we went through a train wreck called the fall. It's original sin. And we fell, the fall of man. We fell from being human to kind of not functioning up to our human potential. But Jesus said this, and this is my encouragement to you. Jesus said, I did not come to condemn the world, to judge the world for being fallen. He said, instead, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. To seek, to look for. Save means heal. And lost in the Bible doesn't mean God couldn't find us. Where are the humans? I think I left them over there by the keys. I lost the humans. No, lost means, in the Greek word in the Bible, it means broken beyond repair. So what's he saying? Jesus' mission was to come to seek, to look for everyone to heal who's got something that's broken beyond repair. That's mental health.
That's mental health. That Jesus came to seek and to save what was broken beyond repair. And yet he brings healing. He is the God of all comfort, the Father of mercy. And he's here today comforting us in our affliction. And so can I say to you right now, if this message around mental health and the hope that Jesus brings, that you're not beyond hope, you're not beyond help, if that resonates in you and you're thinking, man, I need some help today, could I encourage you, would you let us step toward you in love? Would you just, if you want some help, would you text love first to 57555? Listen, we want to help you right now. If this mental health is a struggle, it's a battle, you're in a difficult spot, would you let us come around you right now? It'd be a beautiful thing as we celebrate the wholeness, the comfort, the mercy that God brings with you. Can I also say we're going to sing a song in just a moment, a song of worship that just says God is moving. And you may not have seen it yet, but he's coming with his healing hand to us. And we're going to have that song sung over us, and we're going to worship together in it. But can I also say to you, listen, if you'd like to know more and maybe even be a part of a healing community, a small group around this idea of mental health, we're starting some brand new groups. And if that appeals to you, if you'd like to see in community God bring healing into your life, would you just text the word group to 57555? And listen, no shame, a place of love, an environment where you're free to just be who you are and let God bring love and help and hope and healing to you in community through the body of Christ. All of us building up and bringing healing to one another. We'd love to help you with that. You just text group to 57555 and we're going to help you. Hey, I want to pray for us, and then we're going to declare that God's moving. Even if we haven't seen it yet, he's moving. So Lord, I just praise you. I thank you that today you have highlighted not only this idea of mental health, and we're bringing it out of the shadows and out of the myths and out of shame. God, we're bringing it into the light of a God of all comfort, a Father of all mercy, one who loves us first. And so God, we bless you, we praise you, and we thank you. Jesus, you came to seek and to save us, to make us whole. God, would you just make us whole even in this moment? God, use the body together to bring wholeness as we learn what it looks like to be a church that heals and walks in grace. And so, Father, would you change us? But God, would you change our world by your grace and love and hope? In Christ's name.